Let me tell you a Bible story you may need today. This is the story of Esther, and it begins quietly. Long before courage was required, before her name was known, before history was changed, Esther was just a young woman living an ordinary life. She did not grow up dreaming of influence. She did not plan for power. She did not seek a position of importance. In fact, Esther was living in a foreign land, far from the place her people once called home. She was an orphan. Her parents were gone, and from a young age Esther learned what it meant to survive quietly. She was raised by her cousin Mordecai, a man who cared for her deeply and taught her how to walk wisely in a world that was not always kind. Esther learned to listen. She learned to observe. She learned when to speak and when silence was safer. And this matters because sometimes God is shaping us long before we understand why. At that time, the land was ruled by a powerful king, a king who lived in luxury, a king who commanded attention, a king who expected obedience. And in the palace, decisions were made that affected thousands of lives. One night, everything changed. The king made a choice that removed the queen from her position, and suddenly the palace was quiet. A search began. Young women from across the land were gathered and brought into the king's house. Among them was Esther. She did not ask for this. She did not chase this opportunity. She was chosen. And without realizing it, Esther stepped into a place that would test her faith, her courage, and her trust in God. Inside the palace walls, Esther was given comfort, food, clothing, protection. But comfort does not always mean peace, because sometimes the place that looks like blessing is also the place where fear grows. Esther kept her identity hidden. She followed Mordecai's instruction and did not reveal her people. She listened, she waited, she observed, and in time Esther found favor, not because she demanded it, not because she forced it, but because God was quietly working. She was chosen to be queen, from orphan to queen. In one moment, her life changed completely, but the story was only beginning. Because being placed does not mean being prepared, and favor does not remove fear. Soon, Esther would face a decision that would cost her comfort, and possibly her life. And this is where the story becomes personal, because many of us have been placed somewhere we didn't choose. A job, a family, a season, a responsibility, and we wonder why. But Esther's story reminds us that God often positions us before he reveals the purpose. And sometimes the calling comes later, much later. As Esther settled into her new life as queen, something else was unfolding quietly, something dangerous. Outside the palace walls, there was a man named Haman. He was powerful, respected, and deeply proud. Haman loved honor. He loved recognition. He expected everyone to bow before him, everyone, except one man, Mordecai. Mordecai refused to bow, not out of arrogance, not out of rebellion, but out of faith. He would not give worship to anyone but God, and this angered Haman deeply. What began as wounded pride quickly turned into hatred. But Haman did not want revenge against one man. He wanted more. He wanted an entire people destroyed. Quietly, strategically, Haman convinced the king to sign a decree, a law that would erase the Jewish people completely. Men, women, children, all marked for destruction on a single day. And the king, not realizing who would be affected, agreed. When Mordecai learned what had been done, his heart broke. He tore his clothes. He wept openly. He cried out in the streets. And word reached Esther. At first, she did not understand the full danger. She lived inside the palace, protected from the suffering outside. But Mordecai sent a message, and his words were not gentle. He warned her. He reminded her who she truly was. And then he said something that would echo through history. Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone will escape. If you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise from another place. But you and your family will perish. And then he asked the question that would change everything. And who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? For such a time as this. Those words stayed with her. Esther understood something in that moment. Her position was not just favor, it was responsibility. But there was a problem. Approaching the king without being summoned was dangerous. One step forward could mean death. Fear filled her heart, and this is the part we understand deeply, because many of us know what it feels like to sense a calling that feels too big, to feel the weight of responsibility without the strength to carry it. Esther did not rush. She did not act impulsively. Instead, she did something powerful. She turned to God. She asked her people to fast and pray with her. No plans, no strategies, just surrender. For 3 days they prayed, they waited, they trusted God with the outcome. And when the time came, Esther made her decision. If I perish, she said, I perish. But I will go. Sometimes courage is not the absence of fear, it is obedience in the presence of fear. And Esther stepped forward, not knowing what would happen, not knowing if the door would open, only knowing that God had placed her there for a reason. And the moment she entered the king's presence, everything hung in the balance. Esther stepped forward. Every sound in the room seemed louder. Every breath felt heavier. This was the moment. No invitation, no guarantee, only obedience. The king saw her, and instead of anger, he extended his scepter. She was welcomed. Life was spared. Grace was given. And in that moment, Esther learned something powerful. When God opens a door, no fear can close it. But Esther did not speak yet. She waited. She invited the king and Haman to a banquet, not once, but twice. This was not hesitation, this was wisdom, because timing matters. And sometimes God asks us to wait even after we step out in faith. At the first banquet, the king asked her, "What is your request?" And Esther paused. She did not rush her words. She did not let fear speak for her. She asked them to return again the next day. That night, something happened. The king could not sleep, and instead of resting, he asked for the records of the kingdom to be read aloud, and in those records he discovered something forgotten. Mordecai, the man who once saved the king's life, had never been honored. What was overlooked was suddenly remembered, and while Esther was waiting, God was working, quietly, precisely. At the same time, Haman's pride was growing. He built a gallows, planning to execute Mordecai. He believed the victory was already his. But pride blinds us, and Haman could not see that the very night he planned destruction, God was rearranging everything. The next morning, the king asked Haman a question. What should be done for the man the king delights to honor? Haman thought of himself, and he answered with confidence. Honor, recognition, public celebration. And then the king said, "Do this for Mordecai." In a single moment, Haman was humiliated. The one he hated was lifted up, and the trap he set began to close around him. Later that day, at the second banquet, the king asked Esther again, "What is your request? It will be granted." This time Esther spoke. Her voice was calm, but her words carried weight. She revealed her identity. She exposed the decree. She spoke the truth, and the room fell silent. The king was enraged. Justice rose. Haman's plan was uncovered, his pride exposed, his power removed, and the gallows he built became his own end. God had turned the story completely. What was meant for destruction became deliverance. What was planned in secret was undone in the open. And Esther, once an orphan, once silent, stood as a woman who trusted God's timing. But the story does not end with victory. It ends with understanding. Because Esther did not save her people by strength alone. She trusted God. She waited. She listened. She obeyed. And God moved in ways she could not have planned, in ways she could not have forced. The question now is not what Esther did. It is what her story asks of us. After the danger passed, life did not simply return to the way it was before, because Esther had changed. She was no longer the young woman who quietly blended into the background. She was a woman who understood what it meant to trust God when the cost was high. The decree of destruction was reversed. Deliverance came, and the people were given a future. But Esther did not cling to her position. She used it. She continued to speak wisely. She continued to lead gently. She continued to serve with humility. Her courage became a reminder that God does not always remove us from difficult places. Sometimes He places us in them, not to break us, but to reveal something through us. Esther's story teaches us that purpose is not always loud. It is not always announced. Often it unfolds quietly through obedience, through waiting, through trust. For such a time as this was not just a moment, it was a calling. And that calling still speaks today, because many of us are standing in places we did not plan for, roles we didn't choose, responsibilities we didn't ask for, moments that feel heavy, and we wonder why. But Esther's life reminds us that where you are now may be exactly where God needs you. You do not have to be fearless. You only have to be willing to listen, willing to trust, willing to step forward when the moment comes. God does not ask us to see the whole picture. He asks us to take the next faithful step, and He does the rest. If you feel unnoticed, remember Esther. If you feel afraid, remember Esther. If you feel unsure of why you are where you are, remember Esther. God is working even when you cannot see it. He is positioning you for a purpose that will become clear in His time. Not early, not late, but right on time. And here is the reminder to carry with you today. You are not where you are by accident. You are not forgotten. You are not unseen. For such a time as this, you are exactly where God intended you to be.